Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're not just covering a piece of history, we're trying to understand the actual mechanics of history itself.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. We're looking at a set of sources that tackles probably the biggest and maybe the most uncomfortable question there is.
Which is, why is the world so unequal?
Exactly. I mean, you look at a map of global wealth today, or even a map from, say, 1500 AD, and the disparity is just staggering. It's huge.
And for centuries, people have been trying to answer why. Why was it Europeans who ended up colonizing so much of the world and not the other way around?
Right. Why didn't Native Americans sail across the Atlantic and conquer Europe? Why do some societies have supercomputers and others are, still struggling with basic infrastructure? It's the fundamental question.
And the answers that people have historically given, the ones they'd maybe whisper or sometimes shout, are, well, they're pretty ugly.
They are. They almost always boil down to biology.
To racism.
To racism, yeah. This deep-seated idea that one group of people is just innately smarter or more inventive or harder working than another group.
And the sources we're diving into today, which are primarily centered around the work and field research of the biologist Jared Diamond, they basically take a sledgehammer to that entire way of thinking.
A complete sledgehammer. The core thesis here, the central argument, is that the broad pattern of human history has absolutely nothing to do with biological differences between peoples.
Nothing.
Zero. It has everything to do with real estate.
Real estate.
Yeah, geography. Biology, but we're talking plants and animals here, not people. And really just the blind luck of where your ancestors happened to be standing 13,000 years ago.
So to unpack all of that, we have to start where the author starts, with a walk on a beach. The year is 1972. Jared Diamond is in New Guinea. Now, you have to picture New Guinea. It is this incredibly mountainous, rugged island just north of Australia, one of the most linguistically diverse places on the entire planet.
And Diamond, he's not there as a historian or an anthropologist, not yet. He's there as an ornithologist. He's studying bird evolution.
Right. And he's walking along the beach with a local man, a politician named Yali.
And Yali is not just some guy. Diamond describes him as this incredibly charismatic, energetic person, who's brilliant. His eyes are flashing. He's asking Diamond these incredibly sharp, probing questions about bird evolution, about how different species adapt to different environments on the island.
He's clearly thinking in a very scientific, very sophisticated way, even without a formal Western education.
Oh, absolutely. But then in the middle of this conversation, Yali just stops. And he turns to Diamond and he asks this question that had obviously been on his mind for a very, very long time.
What's the question?
He says, why is it that you white people developed so much cargo and brought it to New Guinea, but we black people had little cargo of our own?
That word, cargo. It's doing so much work in that sentence.
A ton of work. I mean, we're not talking about shipping containers here, not really.
No, in New Guinea, cargo had become this almost a spiritual term. It meant all the material goods that Europeans brought with them.
Things like steel axes, matches, modern medicine, clothing, umbrellas, even soft drinks.
And you have to imagine, if your society has been using stone tools for millennia, and the New Guineans were probably the most skilled stone tool makers on Earth at that time, this stuff must seem like magic.
Like it just appeared out of thin air. It represents a level of power that is almost incomprehensible. So cargo means wealth, it means technology, it means power.
So Yali's question is incredibly personal. He's looking at Diamond, and he's essentially asking, look, my people are smart, we're clever, we can survive in this jungle in ways you never could, so why didn't we invent the steel axe?
Yeah.
Why aren't we the ones with the cargo?
And that question, it just puts Diamond and really all of Western civilization in a corner. Because if you don't have a good scientific answer for Yali, you leave a vacuum.
And that vacuum gets filled by the racist explanation.
Exactly. For centuries, the default Western worldview was, well, we have the cargo because we're just better. We're biologically superior. We're more inventive, more intelligent.
But Diamond rejects that completely. And not just because it's polite to do so. He rejects it based on his own observations.
Right. Based on data. He'd spent, at that point, decades working with New Guineans, and his assessment was that, on average, they were actually more intelligent, more alert, more inquisitive than the average European or American.
And he had a theory for why that might be.
He did. His theory was that in modern Western societies, you can be, frankly, a little passive and still survive just fine. The state protects you, you can buy your food. But in the New Guinea highlands, if you're not constantly alert, if you misidentify a plant or forget a landmark, you could die.
So natural selection is still a very immediate pressure. The genetic pressure is for active, high-functioning intelligence.
Right. So if the New Guineans are just as smart, or maybe even smarter, then the original question comes back even stronger. Why didn't they have the cargo?
And that is the mission of this deep dive. We're going to try to answer Yali's question. We had to peel back thousands of years of history to find the root cause. And to do that, we have to go back to the starting line.
To 11,000 BC.
Okay, so why that specific date? It sounds a little arbitrary. Why not start with, I don't know, the Roman Empire or ancient Egypt?
Because if you start with Rome, you're jumping into the story when it's already halfway over. By the time of the Caesars, the global inequalities were already deeply entrenched. Eurasia was already way ahead. 11,000 BC is the crucial starting point because it's roughly the end of the last ice age, and it's just before the invention of agriculture. If you could take a snapshot of planet Earth in that year, basically everyone everywhere was a hunter-gatherer.
So it was, in theory, a level playing field.
More or less, yeah. We were all living in small nomadic bands. We were all using stone tools. We were all hunting wild game and gathering wild plants. No one had a city. No one had a steel sword. No one had an alphabet. It's as close to a fair start as human history ever gets.
But getting to that starting line, that took millions and millions of years. The sources give this really quick, compressed history of human evolution.
Right. Our lineage split from the apes in Africa about 7 million years ago. And for almost all of that time, the human story was an exclusively African story.
Which is a point that is so important and often overlooked. Africa is the cradle.
It's the cradle, which means it has the longest continuous history of human habitation, which in turn means it has the highest level of human genetic diversity on the planet. That's a key fact to remember for later.
Okay, so eventually our ancestors, like Homo erectus, start to trickle out of Africa into Europe and Asia. But the moment we really become us, modern humans, happens much more recently.
Around 50,000 years ago. This is what the source material calls the Great Leap Forward.
And this is when we stop just, banging rocks together to make simple tools and start making art.
It's a creative explosion. Suddenly, in the archaeological record, you see standardized stone tools that are much more sophisticated. You see the first real jewelry beads made of ostrich shells. You see the first musical instrument.
The famous cave paintings in France and Spain.
Exactly. Lascaux, Chauvet. We see bone needles, which implies tailored clothing to survive the cold. This is the period when the Cro-Magnons show up in Europe and pretty quickly replace the Neanderthals.
And the big debate is what caused this leap, right? Was it a physical change?
That's the question. Was it the final perfection of the voice box, allowing for complex grammatical language? Or was it some last-minute rewiring of the brain's organization? We don't know for sure, but we know what it allowed.
It allowed us to expand.
Massively. With this new cultural and technological toolkit, modern humans finally broke out of the old world Africa and Eurasia and colonized the last great frontiers, Australia and the Americas.
Let's start with Australia. Because what happened there involves a huge mystery that's, I think, really central to this whole argument about inequality.
It is. So humans arrive in Australia and New Guinea, which were a single landmass back then called Sahol, sometime around 40,000 or maybe even 50,000 years ago.
And just getting there was an incredible achievement.
A monumental achievement. You have to understand, even with sea levels much lower during the Ice Age, you could not walk to Australia. There were always deep water channels separating it from the Asian mainland.
So they had to build boats.
They had to build some kind of watercraft. This is the very first evidence of seafaring in human history by tens of thousands of years.
Okay, so right off the bat, the ancestors of Aboriginal Australians and New Guineans are the world's first mariners. That sounds like a pretty significant head start in the technology department.
You'd think so, wouldn't you? It was a massive leap.
Yeah.
But when they landed, they stepped into a world that was, well, it was completely alien, a world of giants. This was the era of the megafauna.
Right, the giant animals. We're talking about giant kangaroos.
10-foot-tall kangaroos, yeah. Things called marsupial lions, which were apex predators. Diprotodonts, which were basically rhinoceros-sized wombats.
Wow.
Massive 400-pound flightless birds, giant monitor lizards. It was a completely different ecosystem.
And then, almost as soon as humans show up in the fossil record, the megafauna disappear.
It's a geological blink of an eye. Within a few thousand years of human arrival, almost all of Australia's large animals are gone, extinct.
Now, there's always a debate about this, isn't there? The paleontologists argue, was it climate change at the end of the Ice Age, or was it people?
It's a classic debate. But Diamond and the sources we're using come down very, very heavily on one side. The overkill hypothesis.
We did it. We hunted them to extinction.
We ate them into oblivion. And the mechanism for why this happened in Australia but not in Africa is so important to the larger argument.
Okay, explain that. Why did the big animals in Africa, like rhinos and elephants, survive us, but the ones in Australia didn't?
It's all about coevolution. In Africa, humans and large animals evolved alongside each other for millions of years. As our ancestors got smarter and better at hunting, the lions and the rhinos and the buffalo learned to be afraid of us. They developed an instinctual fear of this clever two-legged ape with the sharp sticks.
But in Australia?
The animals had never seen a human before, ever. They had no evolutionary experience with a predator like us. They had no fear. They were like giant dodos. A human hunter could likely walk right up to a 2-ton diprotodon and stick a spear in it, and the animal wouldn't even know to run away.
It was a slaughter, a blitzkrieg.
It was. Now, okay, that's a tragedy for the diprotodon, but why does this matter for Yali's question? How does killing giant kangaroos 40,000 years ago connect to a lack of cargo in the 20th century?
Because you can't domesticate an animal that's already extinct.
Exactly. This is our first major accident of geography. When those first human colonists wiped out the megafauna, Australia lost its entire pool of potential large domesticable animals.
All of them.
All of them. There were no wild cattle, no wild horses, no wild pigs, no wild sheep left. You can't hitch a plow to a red kangaroo. You can't ride it into battle. So Australia was stripped of the animal power needed for intensive agriculture and warfare right at the very beginning.
They basically ate their own industrial revolution before it could even start.
In a way, yes. They lost their biological capital. Now, let's jump across the Pacific to the Americas. A very similar story, but on a different timeline.
Right. Humans get to the Americas much later.
Much later. The consensus is around 11,000 BC, so about 13,000 years ago. People known as the Clovis culture crossed the Bering Land Bridge, which connected Siberia and Alaska.
And they spread incredibly fast.
Unbelievably fast. It's one of the most rapid expansions in human history. Within about 1,000 years, their descendants had populated the entire hemisphere, from the Arctic ice all the way down to Patagonia at the tip of South America.
And just like in Australia, when they arrive, the big animals disappear.
The American megafauna gets wiped out. Mammoths, mastodons, giant ground sloths, American lions and cheetahs. And crucially for our story, the Native American horse.
Wait, there are horses in America?
Oh, yeah. Horses actually evolved in North America and then spread to Asia across that same land bridge. But the ones that stayed behind were hunted to extinction around 11,000 BC.
So the horses Pizarro rode weren't native. They were reintroduced from Spain.
Exactly. So just like Australia, the Americas were stripped of almost all of their large domesticable mammals. The only real exception was the ancestor of the llama and alpaca down in the Andes. But that was it.
Okay, so let's go back to our thought experiment. It's 11,000 BC. An alien archaeologist lands on Earth and wants to place a bet on which continent's people will eventually develop the most cargo and dominate the globe.
Right. Who do you bet on?
You look at the map, everyone's a hunter-gatherer, everyone's using stone tools, the playing field looks even.
It's not at all obvious who the winner will be. Do you bet on Africa? You might say, well, these people have the longest head start in human evolution, the greatest genetic diversity. They're coexisting with their megafauna. That's a strong bet.
Or do you bet on Australia? These people were the first to invent watercraft. They're clearly innovative.
Or the Americas. This is a vast, resource-rich, double continent. Look at all this space.
And what about Eurasia?
Well, it's a big landmass, but it doesn't seem to have any obvious decisive advantage over the others. Not yet.
So the outcome was not predetermined by the people themselves. The idea that Europeans just had more time, a head start in terms of cognitive ability, that just doesn't hold up.
Not at all. The fact that our alien couldn't confidently pick the winner proves that the result wasn't about the intrinsic qualities of the people. It was about the hidden cards in each continent's hand, the raw materials of plants and animals that they had to work with.
To really drive this point home, that it's the environment that shapes societies, not the other way around, the sources offer up a perfect small-scale test case, a natural experiment.
Yeah, history doesn't usually give you a clean petri dish to study, but the settlement of Polynesia is as close as it gets. This is the story of the Maori and the Moriori.
And this story, it's haunting. It's a perfect but deeply tragic A-B test of history.
It really is. So for context, you have the Polynesians. They are arguably the greatest navigators and explorers of the pre-modern world. Around AD 1000, one group of these Polynesian farmers settles the massive temperate islands of New Zealand.
And they become the Maori.
They become the Maori. And New Zealand is a great place for their style of agriculture. It's warm enough, so they plant their crops, their populations grow dense, they develop complex societies, they build these incredible forts called pa. They have a clear social hierarchy: chiefs, priests, warriors, commoners.
And because they're competing for the best farmland, they develop a culture of chronic, ferocious warfare.
Absolutely. They are formidable warriors. Now, here's where the experiment starts. Shortly after settling New Zealand, a small group of these same Maoris get back in their canoes and set sail east, out into the empty Pacific.
They travel about 500 miles, and they find the Chatham Islands.
And this is the critical divergence. The Chatham Islands are not New Zealand.
How are they different?
They're much smaller, much more isolated, and crucially, they're colder. They're just a little too cool and windswept for the tropical crops the Polynesians brought with them to grow reliably.
So their agricultural package fails.
It fails. These people, who were farmers by ancestry and tradition, are forced to abandon agriculture and revert to a hunter-gatherer lifestyle. They survive by hunting seals, fishing, gathering shellfish, and birds.
And because they're hunting and gathering on a small set of islands, their population can't get very big.
Right. It maxes out at about 2,000 people total. And this is where the social engineering kicks in. If you have 2,000 people trapped together on a tiny island with no escape, you cannot afford war. A single major conflict could lead to mutual annihilation.
So they made a conscious choice to change their culture.
They did. They developed a strict pacifist ideology based on a leader named Nunuku. It became their custom to resolve disputes through ritual combat, but not to kill. They literally outlawed war. Over the centuries, they gave up their weapons, their forts, their chiefs. They became a simple, egalitarian, peaceful society of hunter-gatherers. They became the Moriori.
So let's fast forward a few hundred years to 1835. You have these two societies descended from the exact same ancestors less than 1,000 years prior.
Same genetic stock. They speak dialects of the same language.
But the Maoris in New Zealand are a dense, technologically complex agricultural society with a strong military tradition. And the Moriori and the Chathams are a sparse, technologically simple hunter-gatherer society with a strong pacifist tradition.
And then they meet again. In 1835, an Australian sealing ship stops at the Chathams and then sails on to New Zealand. And the crew tells the Maori about these islands. They say, hey, there's a place a few days sail away, it's full of food, and the people there don't know how to fight. So 900 Maori charter the ship. They bring their guns, their clubs, their axes, and they sail to the Chathams and invade.
And it's a complete catastrophe for the Moriori.
It's a massacre. The Moriori actually held a council. They outnumbered the invaders nearly 2-1. The younger men wanted to fight, to use their numerical advantage. But the elders insisted on their custom of peace. They said, no, we do not kill. That is not our way. They decided to offer peace and share their resources.
And the Maori did not accept the offer.
No, they didn't operate by the same rules. They swept through the islands, slaughtering hundreds. They enslaved the survivors. They cannibalized many of the dead. One of the Maori conquerors was interviewed later and said, and this is a chilling direct quote, "We took possession in accordance with our custom. We caught all the people. Not one escaped. What of that? It was in accordance with our custom."
That's just brutal.
Yeah.
But the point the source material makes isn't to cast moral judgment.
No, it's not about good guys and bad guys. It's about mechanics. It's not that the Maoris were innately more vicious or that the Moriori were innately more peaceful. It's that the environment of New Zealand supported agriculture.
Which led to a food surplus.
Which led to a dense population, which led to specialization, including a warrior class and a political structure that could organize and launch an overseas invasion.
Whereas the cold, isolated environment of the Chathams forbade all of that. It mandated a small population and a peaceful way of life as a survival strategy.
Exactly. If you could magically swap the babies at birth, if you'd put the Maori ancestors on the Chathams and the Moriori ancestors on New Zealand, the roles in 1835 would have been completely reversed. The environment was the decisive factor.
So the Chatham Islands serve as this perfect microcosm, a small-scale proof of concept. Now we need to apply that same logic to the macrocosm, the collision of entire continents.
Yes. We're going to the single most dramatic moment in the collision between the Old World and the New World.
The collision at Cajamarca.
November 16th, 1532. High in the Peruvian Andes.
Okay, set the scene for us. Who are the players here?
On one side, you have the Inca Empire, At this moment, it is the largest, most populous, and most technologically advanced state in the Americas. It stretches for thousands of miles along the Andes.
And it's ruled by an emperor, Atahualpa.
Who is considered a living god, the son of the sun. He is at the head of a massive victorious army. He's camped at the town of Cajamarca with about 80,000 soldiers.
80,000.
An ocean of men. And on the other side, you have Francisco Pizarro. He's a Spanish conquistador. He's leading this tiny ragtag band of mercenaries. 168 men total. Just 62 of them have horses. They are thousands of miles from any Spanish reinforcement, deep in hostile territory, completely outnumbered.
And they were terrified. I read that in the Spanish chronicles, the soldiers were so scared the night before that many of them wet themselves in their armor.
They fully expected to die. But Pizarro, he has a plan. He's learned from Cortez's conquest of the Aztecs. He sets a trap.
He hides his men.
Hides them in the buildings around the main square of Cajamarca. He invites Atahualpa to a meeting, and Atahualpa agrees. He decides to enter the square with just a ceremonial retinue, leaving his armed soldiers outside the town. He's not expecting a fight. He's curious, maybe a little arrogant. He wants to see these strange, bearded men and their weird animals.
So he walks right into the ambush.
He does. A Spanish friar comes out and offers Atahualpa a Bible. Atahualpa, who has never seen a book in his life, holds it, looks at it, and then throws it on the ground in contempt.
And that's the signal.
That's the signal. Pizarro gives the order. Trumpets blast, cannons fire, and the Spanish cavalry charges out of the buildings into the crowded square.
And what happens next isn't really a battle. It's a slaughter.
It's an absolute rout. The Inca are completely unprepared. They're unarmed. The sound of the guns, the smoke, it creates chaos. But the real terror, the real shock weapon is the horses.
The Incas had never seen a horse.
Never. They had no large animals at all, other than llamas. Suddenly, these armored monsters are crashing through the crowd at 30 miles an hour, with men on their backs swinging steel swords. The Incas panic. They stampede. They trample each other to death trying to escape through the narrow town walls.
And the Spaniards just ride them down.
They ride them down. At the end of the day, something like 7,000 Inca are dead. Atahualpa is a prisoner.
And the Spanish casualties?
0. Not a single Spaniard was killed.
168 versus 80,000? It's one of the most lopsided military encounters in all in history. It just seems impossible.
It does. So now we have to do the deep dive. We have to dissect why. Why did this happen? The source material breaks it down into the proximate factors, the immediate causes.
Okay, let's start with the most obvious one, steel.
Right. Guns, germs, and steel. Let's talk steel first. The Incas had weapons, of course. They had clubs tipped with stone or bronze. They had slingshots. They wore quilted cotton armor. And against other Native American armies, that was effective.
But against Spanish steel, it was useless.
Completely useless. An Inca club just bounces off a steel helmet or a breastplate. Maybe you get a dent. But a Spanish sword made of Toledo steel. It slices right through that quilted armor. It's the difference between a blunt instrument and a razor blade. The Spaniards had an overwhelming advantage in both offense and defense.
Proximate factor number 2, the horses. We mentioned the psychological shock.
It's more than just shock. It's a massive tactical advantage. Height, speed, momentum. A soldier on foot simply cannot stand up to a cavalry charge in open ground. A horseman can strike down with impunity, can move around the flank, can chase down fleeing enemies. The horse was the main battle tank of 1532.
Okay, so we have steel and horses. But there's another factor here that's less obvious, but maybe even more important. Information.
Yes. Literacy. This is a huge one. Pizarro himself was illiterate, but that doesn't matter. He came from a literate culture.
His society had writing. They recorded history.
Right. He knew all about Hernán Cortez's conquest of the Aztec Empire in Mexico, which had happened just over a decade earlier. He had read, or had read to him, accounts of Cortez's tactics. He knew the playbook.
What was the playbook?
Go straight for the leader, capture the king, the emperor, the god figure, paralyze the command structure, use him as a puppet, sow division among the natives. Pizarro knew exactly what he was going to do before he even met Atahualpa. He had a strategic database built on centuries of written history.
At Atahualpa. What did he know about the Spaniards?
Nothing. Absolutely nothing. He was operating in a complete information vacuum. His society had a form of record-keeping with knotted strings called quipu, but not a system of writing that could convey detailed narratives or history. He didn't know these people existed until they landed on his shores.
So he had no idea what he was walking into.
He was completely blind. He couldn't conceive of an enemy that operated this way. He had no precedent for it. He walked into that trap because he couldn't imagine it was a trap. That's the power of literacy versus non-literacy.
And that brings us to the final and most deadly proximate factor, the invisible weapon.
The one Pizarro didn't even know he was carrying. Germs.
This is the real killer.
It's the silent artillery that did most of the work for him. Years before Pizarro's little band even arrived in Peru, a wave of old-world disease had already swept down from Panama and into the Inca Empire. Smallpox.
And the Incas had zero immunity to it.
Zero. The disease killed the reigning emperor, Huayna Capac, and also his designated heir.
Which plunged the entire empire into a massive civil war.
Exactly. Atahualpa had just defeated his own brother, Huáscar, in a brutal, bloody war for the throne. So when Pizarro arrived, he wasn't walking into a strong, unified empire at the peak of its power. He was walking into an empire that had been politically destabilized and ravaged by a mysterious plague that had killed maybe half its population.
He walked into a power vacuum inside a catastrophe.
He did. The germs cleared the path for him.
Okay, so let's recap. The proximate reasons for Pizarro's victory were steel swords and armor, horses, literacy and written history, and epidemic diseases. But that still doesn't answer Yali's question.
No, because a smart guy like Yali would just take it one step further. He'd say, okay, I get it, but why did you Spaniards have the steel, the horses, the writing, and the germs? Why didn't we Incas give you a deadly disease and conquer Spain with our giant llamas?
Right, we have to go deeper to the ultimate cause.
And this is the bottom of the onion. The ultimate cause, the root of it all, is food production. It's not that Spaniards were smarter. It's that Spaniards were the inheritors of thousands of years of farming.
Farmer power.
It all comes down to the simple, brutal math of calories.
Okay, let's break this connection down because it's not immediately obvious. How does planting wheat lead to a steel sword?
It's all about energy density per unit of land. If you're a hunter-gatherer, you might need a square mile of forest to feed 1 or 2 people. Most of the biomass in that forest, the tree trunks, the leaves, the poisonous mushrooms, is inedible to humans. You spend your whole day walking around looking for the few things you can actually eat.
But on a farm.
On a farm, you clear that square mile and you plant something like wheat. Now, nearly 100% of the biomass is edible. Suddenly, that same square mile of land can support not 2 people, but 200, maybe even 1,000.
So right away, farmers just have a massive numerical advantage. There are more of them.
A brute force advantage in numbers. 10 hunter-gatherers with spears are going to lose a fight against 1,000 farmers with pitchforks, just on numbers alone.
But it's not just about population size. It changes the whole way you live.
It changes everything. Let's talk about birth spacing. This is a fascinating biological detail. If you're a nomadic hunter-gatherer mother, you have to carry your child with you everywhere you go.
You can't carry 2 infants at once.
You can't. So you have to wait until your first child is old enough to walk and keep up with the band on its own, which is usually around age 4 before you can have another baby. Your family size is limited by how much you can carry.
So population growth is literally capped by the walking speed of a toddler.
Pretty much. But now, imagine you're a farmer. You live in a settled village. You don't have to carry your baby all day. You can have a new baby every 2 years.
So the population doesn't just grow, it explodes.
It's an explosion. And because you're sedentary, living in one place, you can do something else a nomad can't. You can store food.
You can build a granary. You can have a surplus.
And surplus is the magic word that unlocks civilization. Once you can store surplus food, you can feed people who don't spend their days producing food.
You can have specialists.
You can have specialists. You can feed a king to organize society. You can feed bureaucrats to manage the surplus. You can feed professional soldiers who do nothing but train for war. You can feed priests who create an ideology that justifies the war. And, crucially for our story, you can feed a full-time blacksmith.
A hunter-gatherer band can't support a guy who just bangs on metal all day.
No way. In a hunter-gatherer society, if you don't go out and find food today, you don't eat today. There is no research and development department. Complex technologies like steelmaking, writing systems, ocean-going ships, these are all luxury goods. They are the products of a society that has calories to spare.
Okay, that connects farming to steel and to writing. What about the germs? How does farming lead to these killer diseases like smallpox?
This is one of the darkest ironies in all of history. Our greatest killers were a direct gift from the animals we loved.
What do you mean?
The major infectious diseases of humanity, the big crowd diseases like measles, tuberculosis, smallpox, influenza, they all evolved from diseases of our domestic animals.
Let's run through the list.
Okay. Measles is a mutation of rinderpest, which is a disease of cattle. Tuberculosis also came from cattle. Smallpox is closely related to cowpox. Influenza comes from a delightful mix of viruses from pigs and ducks. Pertussis, or whooping cough, from pigs and dogs.
So, because farmers started living in close, constant proximity to their livestock, living in the same dwellings, breathing the same air, getting splashed with their waste, the animal microbes had a chance to jump the species barrier.
Exactly. And for the first few millennia, these new diseases were devastating. They would sweep through farming populations and kill huge numbers of people. But over many generations, those populations started to build up genetic resistance. And more importantly, they developed immunity. A kid would get measles, and if they survived, they were immune for life.
But for a disease like measles to persist, it needs a constant supply of new victims.
It does. This is the idea of a critical community size. Measles, for instance, is an acute illness. It burns through a person in a couple of weeks. You either die or you recover, and you're immune forever. For the virus to survive, it has to find a new, non-immune person to infect before it runs out of hosts.
And to do that, you need a big population.
You need a population of at least 500,000 people living in relatively close contact to keep a disease like measles circulating indefinitely.
Which a small hunter-gatherer band of, say, 50 people could never provide.
Never. If measles somehow got into an isolated hunter-gatherer band, it would infect everyone. Some would die, the rest would recover, and then the virus would have nowhere else to go. It would burn itself out and disappear. So, paradoxically, hunter-gatherers were much healthier. They didn't suffer from these epidemic plagues.
Until the farmers showed up.
Until the Europeans showed up carrying this invisible arsenal of germs that they had co-evolved with for thousands of years thanks to their cows and pigs.
And when those germs hit the Americas, where people had no prior exposure and no immunity.
It was an apocalypse. Modern estimates suggest that up to 95% of the pre-Columbian population of the Americas died from Old World diseases. It was the greatest demographic catastrophe in human history. The germs did far more killing than the guns and steel ever did.
Which raises a question I've always had. Why was it a one-way street? Why didn't Columbus and his men catch some terrible Aztec flu and wipe out Europe?
It comes back to the animals again. Think about it. What large mammals were domesticated in the Americas?
Llamas and alpacas in the Andes. And guinea pigs? Turkeys. That's about it.
Right. And llamas are not like cattle. People don't keep them in vast, dense herds. People don't generally live inside barns with their llamas. And most importantly, people don't drink llama milk. The opportunities for microbial exchange were just vastly lower. The Americas had very few domestic animals, and therefore they developed very few epidemic crowd diseases of their own to give back to the Europeans.
So to wrap up this part of the argument, Pizarro had steel, horses, writing, and germs because his society was based on agriculture. The Incas lacked those things because their agriculture was less intensive and involved far fewer domestic animals.
Precisely. So now we've peeled back one more layer, but there's still a final question.
Why there? Why did productive agriculture, with all the right plants and animals, arise in Eurasia but not in, say, Australia or California, both of which are modern agricultural powerhouses?
This is the final, ultimate cause, the answer to Yali. It wasn't a choice people made, it was a geographical lottery.
The haves and have-nots of wild species.
Exactly. The source material is very clear on this. Based on archaeological and genetic evidence, we know that farming wasn't invented once and then spread everywhere. It arose independently in just a few places on Earth.
How many?
There are 5 confirmed definite homelands of agriculture. The first and earliest was Southwest Asia, the Fertile Crescent, around 8500 BC.
Then China, right?
Yes, China, by about 7500 BC, with rice and millet. Then Mesoamerica, what is now central Mexico, by about 3500 BC, with corn, beans, and squash. Around the same time, the Andes and Amazonia region of South America, with potatoes and manioc.
And the fifth one is surprising.
It is. The eastern United States, around 2500 BC.
I had no idea Native Americans in, Kentucky and Ohio were among the world's first farmers.
They were. They independently domesticated sunflowers, sumpweed, and a few other local plants. But here's the crucial difference. A sumpweed is not wheat. A sunflower is not a potato. The crops of the eastern U.S. were just not productive enough. They were a nice dietary supplement, but they couldn't support the kind of massive population densities and urban civilizations that wheat or rice could.
So it's not just a question of if you started farming, it's a question of what you had to farm with.
That is the absolute key. The Fertile Crescent didn't just start farming first, it won the biological lottery. It happened to be the native habitat for the wild ancestors of the most valuable crops and animals on the planet.
What was in their starter pack?
They had wild wheat and barley. These are botanical superstars. They're high in protein, easy to sow, they grow quickly, and they're easy to store for long periods. They also had pulses like lentils and chickpeas. And for animals, they had the wild ancestors of 4 of the big 5 major domestic mammals. Wild goats, sheep, pigs, and cattle.
All in one place.
All living in the same hills and valleys. No other place on Earth had that complete package.
What about the other homelands?
China did very well with rice, and they got pigs. Mesoamerica had corn, which was amazing, but they only had the turkey. No large mammals for plowing or transport. The Andes had the llama, but their main crop was the potato, which is nutritious but harder to store than grain.
And in Australia?
Nothing. No domesticable native grains, no domestical native mammals at all after the megafauna extinction. They had literally nothing to work with. It wasn't for lack of trying or lack of intelligence. The raw materials simply were not there.
You have a note here about the Anna Karenina principle for animals. This explains why we don't ride zebras into battle.
Right, from Tolstoy's novel, happy families are all alike. Every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. This principle applies perfectly to animal domestication. For a wild species to be a successful candidate for domestication, it has to pass a whole checklist of criteria. If it fails on just one of those criteria, the whole enterprise is a failure.
So what's on the checklist?
Okay, first, diet. It has to be an herbivore or an omnivore. Domesticating a carnivore, like a tiger, is incredibly inefficient. You'd have to raise other animals just to feed your tigers.
Makes sense.
Second, growth rate. It has to grow up fast. A farmer can't wait 15 years for their elephant or gorilla to reach adult size. You need something that's ready to eat or work in a year or 2, like a pig or a sheep.
Third criterion.
Captive breeding. Some animals just have a crippling case of stage fright. They refuse to breed in captivity. Cheetahs are a classic example. Ancient Egyptians and others tried for centuries to domesticate them, but their complex, wide-ranging courtship rituals just don't work in a pen.
Okay, what's next?
A nice disposition. This seems obvious, but it rules out a lot of candidates. We never domesticated grizzly bears for a reason. They tend to kill their keepers. This is also the problem with the African buffalo. It's big and eats grass, but it's famously unpredictable and aggressive.
And this is the zebra problem too, right? They look like horses with stripes. Why not domesticate them?
Yeah. Zebras are notoriously nasty. They have a terrible bite, a tendency to kick, and as they get older, they become incredibly ornery and impossible to manage. They injure more zookeepers every year than tigers do. You simply cannot reliably saddle a zebra.
Wow. Okay, and the last criteria.
It's a combination of panic response and social structure. You want animals that have a herd structure with a clear dominance hierarchy, like wild horses or wild cattle. They're used to following a leader. If a human can take control of that leader position, the whole herd will follow.
And animals that don't have that.
They just panic and scatter. Gazelles and most deer species are like this. When they sense danger, their instinct is for every individual to bolt in a different direction. You can't herd them.
So when you apply that entire checklist to the world's thousands of land mammal species, you find that very, very few pass on all counts.
A tiny fraction. And it just so happened that the wild ancestors of the cow, the pig, the sheep, the goat, and the horse were all native to Eurasia. The Americas got the llama. Sub-Saharan Africa, despite its incredible diversity of amazing animals, got none. Not one. It wasn't that Africans failed to domesticate the zebra, it's that the zebra is fundamentally undomesticable. It was just bad luck.
There is one last huge geographical factor that ties this all together. It's not just what plants and animals you have, but how easily they can spread, the shape of the continents.
Yes. The axis of orientation, this is, I think, the most elegant and powerful part of the entire argument. It's so simple once you see it.
So if you look at a world map,
you'll see that the Americas are arranged vertically. They're tall and thin. They have a north-south axis. Africa is also arranged on a north-south axis.
But Europe and Asia together is the opposite. It's wide and fat. It's arranged on an east-west axis.
And this makes all the difference in the world. Why? Because of latitude.
Right. Climate is largely determined by latitude.
If you travel 1,000 miles east or west, you stay at roughly the same latitude. That means the day length is the same, the seasons are the same, the general climate is similar, the diseases are similar.
So a crop like wheat, which was first domesticated in the Fertile Crescent, could spread relatively easily all the way west to Ireland and east to Japan.
Like wildfire. It found a continuous band of similar climates all the way across the continent. The package of crops, animals, and technologies developed in the Fertile Crescent could spread rapidly across the entire Eurasian landmass.
But now consider the Americas, with its north-south axis.
If you try to move a crop 1,000 miles north or south, you cross many different climate zones. The day lengths are different, the growing seasons are different.
So corn maize, which was domesticated in tropical central Mexico, couldn't just jump up to Canada.
It couldn't. It had to be painstakingly genetically adapted, generation by generation, to survive in the longer days and shorter growing season of North America. That process took thousands of years. The continent's geography acted as a massive barrier to diffusion.
And it wasn't just crops, was it?
No, it was animals and ideas, too. The llama, domesticated in the Andes, would have been incredibly useful to the Aztecs and Mayas in Mexico. But it never got there. Why? Because the hot tropical lowlands of the Panama Isthmus formed an impenetrable barrier for a cold-adapted mountain animal. They were cut off.
So the east-west axis of Eurasia acted like a superhighway for the spread of farming, technology, and ideas.
And the north-south axis of the Americas and Africa acted like a series of roadblocks. So by 1492, Eurasia was this one vast interconnected zone where innovations from one end could reach the other. They shared crops, animals, technologies, writing systems, and yes, germs. The Americas, by contrast, were a set of disconnected islands of civilization. The Incas and the Aztecs might as well have been on different planets.
Let's bring it all home. Let's give the final, complete answer to Yali.
The final answer to Yali's question, why do you have all the cargo, is this. It's not because my ancestors were smarter than yours. It's because my ancestors, 10,000 years ago, happened to live in a part of the Wang with an east-west axis. And it was the native home of wild wheat, barley, cows, pigs, sheep, and goats.
And your ancestors happened to live in a rugged tropical part of the world with a north-south axis, with low-protein root crops, and with no domesticable large animals at all.
My ancestors didn't win a race. They just got dealt a much, much better hand of cards by geography.
When you look at history through that lens, it just changes everything. It removes the element of moral judgment. It's not about the superiority of the conquerors or the inferiority of the conquered. It's just mechanics, environmental determinism.
It is. But I want to leave you, our listeners, with one final provocative thought to mull over. We've spent this whole deep dive essentially arguing that for 13,000 years, geography was destiny.
Right. Where you were born determined the kind of society you would live in.
If you were born in New Guinea, you were almost certainly going to live in a small-scale tribal society with stone tools. If you were born in England, you were going to live in a large-scale state with steel tools. The script was already written.
But what about today? In the 21st century?
Today, we live in a globalized world. I can fly a strawberry from a farm in Chile to a store in London in under 24 hours. We have the internet. An idea born in a garage in California can reach a village in Kenya instantly.
So, have we finally broken the tyranny of geography? Have we escaped the curse of the axis?
That's the billion-dollar question, isn't it? On the one hand, you can look at a place like Singapore. It's in the tropics, terrible geography for productive agriculture. But through trade, good institutions, and technology, it's one of the wealthiest places on Earth. Or Israel, a tech powerhouse in the middle of a desert.
So maybe we have broken the curse.
But on the other hand, you can look at a map of global poverty today. The poorest nations on Earth are still overwhelmingly concentrated in the tropics. Many are still crippled by the long-term legacy of diseases like malaria, which were also a product of geography. So are the inequalities we see today just the long, fading echoes of who got the good plants and the docile cows 10,000 years ago?
Or has the modern world finally created a new game with new rules where geography no longer dictates the winner?
That's the question for you to think about. Are we still just playing out a hand that was dealt to our ancestors during the Ice Age? Or can we finally reshuffle the deck?
A perfect place to end. This has been a huge journey. We've gone from the first boats to the fall of the Inca, from the genetics of almonds to the sociology of germs.
We covered a lot of ground, and we didn't even get into the specifics of why China didn't conquer the world or the story of the alphabet.
That'll have to be for another time. Thanks for listening to The Deep Dive.
We'll see you next time.